So the screen is yours, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amir. Thank you, and welcome to all of you. I think we have 14, 15, and no doubt more will be coming on. We are recording this, and my guess is that you'll be able to go back and listen to it. If there are things you don't understand, if I speak too quickly, or if I use some vocabulary that you're not used to, that you don't know, you'll definitely be able to go back and watch this at a slower speed or watch it again in order to get everything. So don't, my first advice to you is don't, relax. Take a deep breath and just relax. Don't worry about not understanding me. But also I want you to, as I mentioned in the video that you watched before asking your questions, you should also remember that the importance of that same feeling of feeling relaxed and anxiety and feeling anxious. We're going to talk a little bit about that because some of you had some questions. Now, I got Amir sent me a list of your questions, and I'm going to answer most of them. I don't think we'll have time to answer all of them. There were a few questions I think some people may have misunderstood. Some people asked some questions that are answered directly in the video that you watched, I hope, before your questions were sent to me. So there are some that I won't get to, and Amir has also asked me to focus on questions that were related to the video that you watched about how to teach intermediate students. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. If you had some other questions, I may be able to we may have time, we may not, okay? All right, so I'm just going to launch into it. That is to say, I'm going to start right away with question number 1. Now, these were all good questions. Normally, when a student asks a question, it's a good idea to say to the student, that's a good question. That makes the student feel proud, and it also makes the student feel like he's asked something worth asking. Even if it isn't a good question, I usually say, good question. So all of these were good questions. I'm not going to say that after every single question. I'm also not going to read your names, partly because I'll probably mispronounce them and I don't want to embarrass myself, but also because some of you had similar questions, and so I've sort of combined them in some cases. Some of these were asked by more than one person. Okay, let's start with the first one. Is sheltered subject matter teaching appropriate for kids, for children? Now you'll remember that sheltered subject matter teaching is teaching a topic, a subject to your students just like you would in a normal school classroom, where you focus on information. You don't focus on the language, but you're doing it, you're teaching it in such a way that they're able to understand the language. So students are picking up the language as they're learning about the topic, but you don't focus on the language, you focus on the subject. So is this appropriate for children? Absolutely. Yes. Anything you can teach children, you can teach in English. Now, you might have to start at a lower level or do things that are simpler for the children. You won't be able to explain everything. So if you are going to teach students the history of Iran, the beautiful country with a glorious history, right? Well, students may already have some information about that, and that's a good thing. They have what we call background knowledge. But you might teach them about certain things in Iranian history, but you might have to limit the things that you teach because you won't be able to explain certain things. But any topic that you can teach children, you can teach in English. In fact, here in the United States, when students come into our schools and they don't speak English, they may speak Spanish, they may speak Farsi, they may speak French, whatever the language. One of the things that we do is we start teaching them topics right away. Usually we start with topics that are not as language intensive, we would say, that don't require a lot of language, like math and science. They require language, but you can also make it comprehensible to them by using other visuals. But any topic can be taught to children. The important thing is that you use the same principles, and the same principles are using lots of graphics, using pictures, using descriptions, using diagrams, using maps, anything that will help them understand the language that you're giving them. Children love stories. We all love stories. Teaching stories is a kind of sheltered subject matter teaching. You can teach literature, you can teach stories and books in English as long as you help students understand it. And of course, when students are beginning, they probably can't understand complicated stories. You can't give them William Shakespeare or one of the great English novelists. You have to start with simple stories, but that's okay. Kids like simple stories too. So you can teach kids the same way you can teach adults, but you have to obviously change the topic. That's something that's appropriate and interesting for children. Okay, second question. Should kids read aloud in class? How does this relate to sustained silent reading? Okay, sustained silent reading, just to remind everyone, is when we give children an opportunity, or adults, teenagers, an opportunity to read a book in class. Now, usually this is only for students who are high beginner or intermediate, at least high beginner intermediate. They have to know enough English to be able to read a book on their own, to be able to read a book independently, we would say. To sustain silent reading, everyone picks their own book, their own, whatever they're interested in, whatever language level is appropriate for them, and they sit down and they read, usually for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes in class. And the reason we do sustained silent reading is we want to encourage students to continue reading that book outside of class. Yes, they get some benefit from reading it in class, but we want to make them interested enough to go out and continue reading that book at home, if possible. So that's what sustained silent reading is. Now, what about reading aloud? Well, I don't think, first of all, teachers often ask students to read aloud in class because they think that reading aloud is going to help them develop their English. There's actually no good research to support that idea. There's no good research to say that the more you read aloud, the better your English will be, or your English pronunciation. In order to read aloud, reading aloud requires a sort of a special skill in your own language, in Farsi or whatever language you speak. To be able to read aloud is not necessarily the same as being a good reader. So don't confuse reading aloud with practicing English. The two things aren't necessarily the same. You don't necessarily get a benefit from reading aloud. I'll be honest with you, a lot of teachers have students read aloud for not a very good reason. And that not a very good reason is they're trying to kill time. They're trying to use up their time in class because it takes a lot longer to have the children or the students read than for you to read. So I would say you want to avoid students reading aloud in class unless you have a really good reason for it. Killing time is not a good reason. Having them practice their English pronunciation is not a very good reason. Reading aloud isn't necessarily going to improve that for them. It might for some students, but for most students, there's no research to say that reading aloud necessarily will improve your English. So I would say be very careful about having students read aloud. Another problem is that students don't like reading aloud. And so if you have students reading aloud, you might make them more nervous. You might make them more anxious. What if I, for example, decided right now that I was going to pick one of you participants, and I was going to say, okay, please read aloud the first paragraph of my notes here. Go. How would you feel? You would be pretty nervous, right? That's how your students feel. So reading aloud really doesn't give you a lot of benefit other than wasting time in your classroom. And you shouldn't be wasting your time in your classroom, right? You should be teaching students, you should be helping them develop their English by giving them lots of comprehensible input. And so that's what I would say about reading aloud. Probably not something that you want to spend a lot of time on. Now, next question. What's the difference between sustained silent reading and free voluntary reading? Well, free voluntary reading is a general, what we call an umbrella topic. It covers all sorts of things that involve students picking their own reading material. So if I go home and I decide to read a book on my own, right now I'm reading some books about German legends in the Middle Ages, in the medieval period in Europe. Well, I do that on my own. I'm doing it just for my own pleasure. That's a kind of free voluntary reading. I'm not taking a test on it. I'm not being given a quiz about what I read. Sustained silent reading is a type of free voluntary reading. So sustained silent reading is reading in class, whereas free voluntary reading includes reading in class and reading outside of class. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose of doing sustained silent reading is to encourage students to read outside of class so that they're doing both kinds of FVR or free voluntary reading. Question number 4, if you're keeping track. How long should I spend on sustained silent reading? Well, when you first start a sustained silent reading program, remember that you need, number 1, to have students who can actually read things independently on their own. So we're not talking about beginning students, we're talking about high beginning, low intermediate, advanced. You need to have books for students to read, and those books have to be available in class for them to read. And you need to give them a comfortable place to read, that is in your classroom without a lot of distractions. How long should it take? Normally, SR programs have students read 15 to 20 minutes. However, as I might have mentioned in the previous video, I would start slowly. Students aren't used to reading in class and they're not used to reading in English. So if you have a group of intermediate students, you might just say, we're going to have you read anything you want for 5 minutes. Now, if you have high school students or elementary school students, grades 1 through 12, as we would say here in the United States, those students, you want to start slowly. Maybe the first day do 5 minutes, and then the next day do 6 minutes, and then slowly build up. Because a lot of kids during the first week or so, when you give them 5 minutes to read, they're just going to go like this. Da, 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 da. They're going to pretend to read, you know, maybe they're going to take their pen and doodle on their thing, right? That's what students do often because they're not used to it. But eventually they'll get bored for that 5 minutes. And eventually, if you go slowly, they'll start to realize that maybe they can try reading. And once they try reading, and that may take a week or 2 weeks for some students, once they try reading, they'll realize that that's a better way to spend their time. And then you can make it longer. It may take a couple of months before you get up to 15 minutes. You may be starting very slowly and doing 5 minutes the first week and 7 minutes the next week and so forth. So start slowly, especially with younger students, that is to say students in high school and elementary or what we might call grade school. Okay, question number 5. Is sheltered subject matter instruction the same as content-based instruction or content-based teaching? And the answer is maybe. It depends on how you define content-based instruction. one of the problems in language teaching is that people have different terms, different vocabulary about teaching, and it means different things to different people. So let me say that the goal of sheltered subject matter teaching is to teach students content, teach them some topic in English or in the language of instruction. Content-based instruction can also be that same thing. So it might mean the same thing. However, there are some people, if you read an article or look at something on the internet, excuse me, somebody talking about content-based instruction, sometimes that includes other things. It might include what we call strategy instruction. Strategy instruction, the theory is that you teach students strategies about how they should learn, or strategies about how they should read, strategies about how they should listen. This is a little different. This is not the same as just teaching content. It's adding a different element. Now, I happen to think that the research on strategy teaching is very weak. I don't think it's very convincing. I don't think that there's a lot of benefit from most kinds of strategy instruction. I think you're better off not worrying about that. So there is a little difference depending on how people use the term. Sheltered subject matter teaching, speaking slowly, using simple language, simple syntax, doing lots of graphic organizers, using lots of visuals. Those are the things that are part of sheltered matter sheltered subject matter teaching. Okay. Question number 7. What is the best way to correct students' mistakes? I know it depends on the age, situation, and level of the student, but I would like your experience in this case. Okay, they're all good questions, right? But this is a really good question. And it's a topic that I want to spend a little extra time on, okay? I want to spend some extra time on this question about correcting student mistakes, or what we call error correction. Should you do it? How should you do it? When should you do it? Let's start with some basic information about language that you know that I didn't include in, I don't think I included in the handout that you read or the video that you watched, but I definitely want to talk about it now. First thing you have to understand is that your brain has two different kinds of language knowledge. There are two different ways that you can know language. One of them is conscious knowledge. This is what we call learning. So when I say language learning, I'm referring to your conscious knowledge of language. Now, conscious knowledge of language are basically the rules, knowing the rules that you learn in a grammar class. So for example, you might have learned that in English, as in many languages, the subject has to agree with the verb. They have to match. If the subject is singular, like I, well, the verb has to be singular. I am. You don't say I are, right? Or I is. The subject and the verb don't agree. So that's an example of conscious knowledge. If you ask me the rule, I can write it down for you and I can tell you what the rule is. That is one kind of knowledge you have about language. Notice that it's a kind of knowledge that we learn in school. In other words, before you get to school, you probably don't know very much consciously about the rules of your language, right? The reason you don't know very much is that you're relying on a second kind of knowledge. And the second kind of knowledge that you have is your unconscious or subconscious knowledge of language. This is knowledge that is in your brain that you don't have to think about, that you didn't study, that you just acquired. So this kind of language is called acquisition. Learning is conscious knowledge, knowing certain rules. Acquisition is subconscious or unconscious knowledge. It's the knowledge that you get just by reading and listening to the language, by getting comprehensible input. So when we talk about the language acquisition device, Notice the word acquisition. This is the language that we get, that we know in our brain, that we use automatically without having to study it. When you were born as a little baby, you started to hear language right away. In fact, you heard language even in your mother's womb, right? For the first 5, 6 years of your life before you went to school, all of your language knowledge was acquisition. You didn't have any conscious knowledge. You didn't know about subject and verbs and adjectives and pronouns. That stuff, that's all conscious knowledge. That's all conscious learning, okay? Now, of these two kinds of knowledge, acquisition is the most important. In fact, in your daily use of language, 95 to 99% of the language you use is probably acquisition. In other words, you're not sitting down and going, is it I am or I is or I are? No, that is not what you're doing. You're just learning, using your acquisition. You're not using your learning. So acquisition is much more important than learning. Now, you can have both kinds of acquisition, both kinds of knowledge rather. You can have learning and acquisition. Sometimes you'll learn a rule in school, but you can't really use it automatically. But you'll also you'll acquire it. So sometimes you learn something and then acquire it later. Sometimes you acquire something and then you learn the rule later. So you may have acquired certain rules, but you don't know what they are. And then your grammar teacher explains the rule to you and go, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Because you've already acquired it. You can have learning, however, without acquisition, and you can have acquisition without learning. Learning does not become acquisition. Very important. Learning does not become acquisition. In other words, if you study the rule over and over and over again, that will not necessarily become part of your acquisition system. They're two separate processes. They're two separate systems, if you will, of language knowledge. So learning can only help you in situations where you can use your conscious knowledge. Now, how can you use your conscious knowledge, the grammar and the rules that you study in school? You have to have 3 conditions that are met. 3 situations have to be present in order for you to use your learning. 3 conditions, we would say. The first is, of course, you've got to know the rule. If you don't know the rule, how can you use the rule? Okay, so the first thing you need is knowledge of the rule. Now, this is not easy because English, like all languages, has thousands of rules. In fact, there are so many rules that we don't even know all the rules. Every day, linguists are discovering new parts of the language, new rules. Now, these aren't simple rules like subject and verb agreement. They're very complicated rules, but they're still rules. They're still things that we use in language. So knowing the rule is actually very difficult. You're a language teacher or going to become a language teacher, so you probably have studied grammar and you probably know a lot of rules. You know a lot more rules than the average person, okay? Grammar rules, language rules. But it's very difficult to learn even a small fraction of the rules. So knowing the rules is actually a very difficult thing. Let me give you an example of a complicated rule that nobody can probably tell you, even native English speakers. Let's say we have the adjectives. Hairy, lots of hair, like me. Hairy, big, black. Those are 3 adjectives. Now, if I said to you, use those 3 adjectives with the noun dog, D-O-G, what order do you put those adjectives in? Well, if you ask a native speaker, if you ask me, what order do I put those in? I would say, a big, black, hairy dog. Big, black, hairy dog. Big, size, black, color, hairy, quality. Now, there is a rule in English for how you put adjectives before a noun. Did you know that? Well, most native speakers of English don't know that. In fact, most native speakers of English don't know what that rule is. It's a very complicated rule, actually, because you can have lots of different adjectives. But if you ask a native speaker of English to put those 3 adjectives in front of the word dog, they'll all do it about in the same way. They've all acquired the rule, but they haven't learned the rule. Rules can be very complicated. So if you're going to use them, first of all, you have to know what they are consciously. Secondly, you have to have time to use the rule. In other words, you have to have time to go, okay, wait a minute, let's see. It's a singular subject, so it should be a singular verb, and the verb is to run, and third person singular, he, let's see, you put an S at the end of the verb, so that's run. He runs. Well, in a normal conversation, you don't have time to do that, right? If you did that in a normal conversation, the other person would be going, oh, gee, what's going on? Hurry up, okay? So in normal conversation, you almost never have a chance to use the rules because there's no time. You do have an opportunity to use the rules in writing, but as we'll see in a second, that isn't as big of an advantage as you think it might be. In fact, most people don't use the rules even when they have time to use them. The third thing that has to be present in order to use your conscious learning is that you have to be focused on the form. That, in other words, you have to be worried about whether you're saying it correctly. So if you're not focused on the grammatical correctness, if you're not thinking, oh, is that right? Is it run or runs? If you're not focusing on the correctness of the statement, you're not going to use the rule, okay? If you're just focused on communicating, getting the message across, well, you're not thinking about the rules. So there's no focus on the rules. So you have to know the rule, you have to have time to use the rule, and you have to be focused on the rule. Those are 3 conditions that are very difficult to meet. We've done a lot of research on this over the last 30 years. Lots of studies about teaching students rules and then having them use the rules in writing. I'm not even talking about speaking. There are lots of studies where we take a group of students and we give them an essay in class. And we take it and we count how many mistakes they made. And then we go back and we teach them for a whole semester. We teach them the different rules. And they'll hand their papers in, their essays in, and we'll circle the mistakes and we'll give it back to them and say, no, that's wrong. You got it. This is the rule. And they'll go back and they'll correct it and so on. And they'll do that for a whole 3 or 4 months. And then at the end of the semester, we say, okay, here's another piece of paper, write an essay, and we collect the essay, and then we go back and we compare the mistakes they made the first day of class and the last day of class. And guess what? Usually there's no difference. Students are making the same mistakes. Even when they know the rule, even when they have time to use the rule, as in writing, and even when we tell them, don't make any grammatical mistakes, they still make mistakes. And that's because it's very difficult to use your conscious knowledge. You have to know it, you have to have time to use it, and actually the most difficult condition is you have to be focused on form. As human beings, we focus on what something means. We don't focus on whether it's grammatically correct or not. It's not natural for us to do that. It's just the way that we're built. And so the brain always focuses on meaning. It doesn't focus on correctness. That's why learning conscious rules is very limited. Now, I'm not saying it's useless. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you should never teach students any rules. I'm saying, however, that it's very limited what they can do with those rules. So you as a teacher have to understand the limits of conscious knowledge, the limits of language learning versus language acquisition. So now I can answer your question. Here's a couple things we know about error correction. Many students, especially adult students, will ask you to correct their errors. I get emails every day, people saying, writing me a question, and then they'll say, oh, could you fix my grammar, please? So adults say that they love it. But if you actually correct every mistake that your students make, what's going to happen? They're going to shut up. They're going to stop talking. They're going to stop communicating. Because even though we say, oh yes, correct my mistakes, we know that once you start correcting everyone's mistakes all the time, students will stop communicating, because now we're embarrassed. Now we're anxious, right? We don't want to make another mistake. I would say then that there are two ways of correcting students' mistakes. One is to say, oh, no, that's wrong. It should be this way. The other way is what we call an expansive correction. So a student will say, for example, I go to the store yesterday. And you as a teacher say, oh, really? You went to the store yesterday? You see, I'm correcting the student by repeating back or recasting what they're saying. There are some teachers who use that, and I think that's okay, because you're not necessarily stopping and saying, oh, no, it's not go, it's went. I went to the store, okay? That would be a direct correction. An expansive or an indirect correction would be repeating what the student says, but repeating it correctly. That's okay, but again, I wouldn't worry about that. Now, some of you are saying, well, Jeff, if we don't correct their mistakes, how are they going to get better in English? Well, remember what we said at 5-10 minutes ago. You have two kinds of knowledge, right? You have learning and you have acquisition. The way that they're going to get better in English is to improve their acquisition. And how do you improve your acquisition? By getting more comprehensible input, by reading and listening to things you can mostly understand. The more comprehensible English you get, the more understandable, enjoyable, interesting English you listen to and read, the better you will get. All of those rules will be acquired subconsciously. In fact, you won't even know you're acquiring the rules as you're acquiring the rules. Just as you often acquire vocabulary, you're reading a book and you go, oh, I know what that word means. I never studied that word. How did I figure out that word? You acquired it subconsciously, unconsciously, by seeing it a couple of different times, several different times, perhaps in a book or in reading. So instead of error correction, you should think about, how can I give my students more comprehensible input? Everyone makes errors as they acquire a new language. It's natural, it's normal, okay? It's a sign that they're making progress. They haven't got there yet, okay? So don't expect students to be error-free. Don't worry about their mistakes in terms of correcting their conscious knowledge, their learning. Worry instead about giving them more comprehensible input that will eventually help them acquire those words, those grammar rules, and so forth. Okay, I spent a lot of time on that, but I think that's really important topic. Let's continue on with our questions. By the way, this is also true when we talk about pronunciation. One person asked a question about, well, if they pronounce the word wrong and I don't correct them, they'll keep pronouncing it wrong. No, they won't. No, they won't. When they hear it enough times, they'll acquire it subconsciously and their pronunciation will improve. But pronunciation is a very special thing. As I may have mentioned in the first video, in the previous video about intermediate language teachers, pronunciation is very much dependent on psychological factors, on what we call the affective filter, the output filter. So even if you tell them the right pronunciation, and even if they have it in their brain, they may not produce it because it's a special case. Okay, let's move on to question number 8. You said that being nervous in class causes a lot of mistakes. What should be done in this situation? I wasn't sure if you were talking about the teacher being nervous or the student being nervous? I actually want to talk briefly about both cases. You, the teacher, should always prepare much more content, much more things to teach for every class than you have time for. Trust me, as a beginning teacher, the worst thing that can happen is that you have your lesson plan, and yes, somebody asked about lesson plans. Should you have a lesson plan? Yes, you should always have a lesson plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be 5 pages long, but you should definitely write down the things you're going to teach, the order that you're going to teach them, and any other information that you think will help you. So if you're going to give a lecture, if you're going to give a talk, or if you're going to explain a topic, you should write it down first. As a beginning teacher, that's extremely important. Not only should you have a lesson plan for every lesson, you should have a lesson plan that will take you almost twice as much time as the time you have in class. Trust me, as a beginning teacher, you want to have more content to teach than you have time for. There's nothing worse than getting up in front of the class and you have a 1-hour class, and then after 40 minutes, you're done with your lesson plan. Now what do? Your students are staring at you and you're standing up there going, oh, what do I do? Always plan more than you need. Then you can always do the rest of it in the next class, you see? So over plan, over prepare. That's the best way for you as a teacher not to be nervous. Now, what about students? Well, there are lots of things you can do to make students comfortable. One thing is to smile. One thing is to tell them to relax. Another thing is to tell them they're doing a good job. Compliment them on their performance. Don't say, oh no, that's wrong. You did that wrong. Very bad student. No, of course you don't do that. You want to make your classroom comfortable. Some students are just going to be nervous. If you're going to, for example, if you call on students, if you say, okay, Amir, what is the answer to this question? Tell me right now. Well, if the student isn't prepared, the student's going to be nervous, right? So don't put yourself or your students in a situation where they're not prepared. They should be prepared and you should be prepared, okay? Question number 9, because we've got about 20 minutes left here and I want to get through as many of these as I can. How do we find comprehensible input based on our level to learn every part of language, especially vocabulary? Well, the best source of comprehensible input for beginning and intermediate students is sheltered subject matter teaching, so in the classroom, and on your own, things that like graded readers, books that are written for students who are acquiring English, okay? There are lots of resources on the web. I don't have any magical, easy way, like go to this website and it's all there for you. No, you're just gonna have to look. It's a process of what we call trial and error. Meaning you try something, it doesn't work, so you try something else. When I'm looking for things to read in French, I pick up a book, I start reading it. If I get lost by the end of the first page, I put it down and I find another book. Same process for you. You just have to go out there and look at lots of different things until you find something that is at your level, okay? Question number 10. If students keep asking for translation of a word or sentence, is it okay to translate words? Yes, it's okay to translate words. If you're using vocabulary that's very difficult, it's okay to translate for them, no problem. My only warning to you would be that if you find that you have to translate 50% of the English you're using, you're doing something wrong. You're using English that's too difficult, or you're not using enough visuals or other information to help them understand the English you are using. So yes, translation is fine, but if you're translating every sentence, no, then the English you're using is too difficult. You need to use simpler vocabulary and simpler syntax. I would say for beginning students, you're probably going to have to translate more things, especially during the first couple of weeks. But once they know some basic commands, some basic, stand up, sit down, that sort of thing, you should move away from the translation. Keep the English easy, okay? That's the way to avoid doing a lot of translation. One beginning method, we're talking about intermediate students in this video, but if you're interested in teaching very beginning students, in addition to doing some sheltered subject matter teaching, there's a wonderful methodology called total physical response, or TPR. Total physical response is a way of teaching very beginning students who know zero English. Google it, look it up. It was developed by a guy by the name of James Asher, A-S-H-E-R, James, J-A-M-E-S, Asher. Okay, question number 11. What can I do to encourage students to respond to me and tell me their stories in English? Well, this is very similar to the question we had earlier about getting students not to be nervous. Remember that students aren't going to be able to start producing lots of English on their own until they've acquired a lot of English. There's something in that we call the silent period. The silent period is the period between when you first start hearing a language, say as a little baby, and you first start producing language. Think of a little baby. A little baby hears language for months, maybe up to 11 months, 12 months, 13 months, 15 months, before the baby is able to start saying things. Mama, dada, okay? That period between when the baby is born and just cries, okay, and the baby is able to produce his or her first word, that's what we call the silent period. The brain is acquiring language, right? During that 7, 8, 9, 10 month period, the brain is picking up language, and it takes a while for the brain to have enough language to be able to produce language. The same is true for your students. If you have very beginning students, the first couple of months, they may not be able to say much of anything. You can give them other opportunities to respond by saying yes and no, or up and down, by raising their hands, by drawing things, by indicating they understand or they don't understand. There are ways that you can interact with students to see if they're understanding. But don't be surprised if it takes a long time for them to start doing things like telling their stories. Students have to have a lot of language before they're able to start producing something like a story. Whatever you do, don't try to force them to speak or force them to write before they're ready. If you force someone to speak before they're ready, they'll speak, they'll say things, but they'll be so nervous and so terrified that it's going to cause them to slow down their language acquisition. They're going to have that input filter that we talked about in the video. They're going to have anxiety, and that's going to cause them to decrease the speed with which they're able to acquire the language. Okay, how can we help shy students overcome their anxiety and eliminate the output filter? Okay, very similar question. When we talk about making students relaxed and calm, you have to think about why a student might be anxious. Why does a student get nervous? Well, a student might get nervous because they don't understand what you're saying, which means you have to repeat it, slow it down, use different language, use visuals, use a graph, write it on the board. That's one reason why students are nervous. Students are also nervous because they're afraid you're going to embarrass them. You're afraid you're going to embarrass them. They're going to make a mistake and everyone's going to laugh at them and you're going to correct their mistake. So how do you avoid doing that? Well, you don't call on them unless you think they're ready to answer the question. You ask them to volunteer the answer. Who knows the answer? Raise your hand. If nobody raises your hand, that means nobody feels comfortable enough. So maybe you need to give them more input. Maybe you need to help them feel more relaxed by giving them more positive feedback, telling them how good of a job they're doing. Make a joke, get them to relax, okay? Students are nervous for a reason. just as you're nervous for a reason. So you have to understand what that reason is and then do something to fix it. Okay, so if it's because they're embarrassed, that means that you need to give them something to answer that is easy and that you know they can do. Okay, and they feel confident in doing, or that they've prepared perhaps even before coming to class. All right, excuse me. In the question number 13, in the LAD and the language acquisition device diagram, what exactly is the meaning of the input and the output filters? Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I tried to explain it in the video, and maybe in a future video we can talk more about this. The input filter are things that prevent the language from being acquired. That subconscious, unconscious knowledge, even though you hear it, your brain doesn't acquire it because you're nervous, because you're anxious, because you have low motivation, or you don't feel like you're a kind of person that can speak English. And so your brain sort of shuts down. Okay, that's the input filter. The output filter, the output filter are things that prevent you from speaking or writing the English that you've acquired. And again, it can be often for the exact same reasons of nervousness, of anxiety, of low motivation. Question number 14, how do we organize information correctly for learners so that they can remember it, or that it remains in their head or in their mind? Well, that's a good question, but it's a hard one to answer. It depends on the content. It depends on the topic you're teaching. One thing I will say, however, is that you don't have to worry about focusing or arranging the grammatical teaching in a certain order. In other words, don't say, let's see, today I have to teach the present progressive, so what story can I use to teach the present progressive? That's usually not a good idea. Don't arrange what you're going to teach based on the grammar points. Find something interesting and comprehensible, and then if you want to talk about some of the grammar in that thing, then go ahead and pick it out and gram it. But don't do it the other way. Don't say, oh, I have to teach the past tense. I must find a story with the past tense. Instead, find a good, interesting story that you can explain that students will like and you can get them interested in. And then if there's something at the end that you want to talk about in terms of grammatical rules, then you can do it. But don't let the grammar drive the content, okay? Question 15, how should we tell students about what we're going to talk about or teach them? One of the things I mentioned is that in any good lesson, first thing you do is you tell them what you're going to do, then you do it, and then you tell them what you did. This introduction, however, it can be very brief. Today I'm going to talk about the seasons and weather. I might say by the end of this class, you're going to be able to answer all of the following questions, and I'll put those questions on the board. What are the 4 seasons and how are they called in English? What are the days of the week? What do we call different kinds of precipitation, like rain and snow and sleet and so on? What are the meanings of these 10 words? And then students can see, wow, I'm going to learn all of that today. I'm going to acquire all of that today, right? So that's all you have to do. You don't have to give a very detailed explanation. It can be a minute, it can be 2 minutes, something that's short, but that gets them thinking about what they're going to study today. Question 16, should we pick something we know about but nobody is interested in? Well, it depends, actually. Remember, when you're dealing with students, especially grade school and high school students, they don't have a lot of experience in the world, right? They don't know a lot of things. So if you have a topic that they don't know anything about, but you can make them interested in it, then talk about it. If you're really interested in a topic, you can probably present it with that excitement, that interest that will get your students interested in it. So don't say, oh, I'm not going to talk about the geography of Asia because I don't think my students will be interested in it. Well, if you're interested in it and you know a lot about it, you can present that to them and get them interested in it. Now, maybe you find that they're just not interested in it. Okay, so next year, next semester, you'll know, probably don't use that topic. Try it, test it out, see if it works. Teaching is basically daily experimentation. You're doing lots of experiments every day to see what works, especially as a beginning teacher. Every day is an experiment, okay? So treat it like a scientist. Every day is an experiment. If it works, great. I'll do it next time. If it doesn't work, well, I learned it doesn't work. I won't do that again, okay? Do you think it's, question 17, do you think it's effective to learn English memorizing songs from a student's favorite singer? Students like to memorize songs, and that's fine. I don't think memorizing songs, however, has proven to be a big advantage in English. However, it's okay to talk about the lyrics, the words in popular songs, and explain them. If students are interested in the song, they're going to be interested in your explanation, and that's comprehensible input. So sure, no problem to do that. I wouldn't make them memorize it, because memorizing is conscious learning, okay? It's not acquisition. So don't worry about memorizing the song, but do use songs to help as a topic for explaining English. I think that's perfectly okay. And of course, younger students love that sort of thing. Number 18, question number 18. What is the right mix of input and output for English learners? The amount of output will increase as students' English gets better. So the first class, the beginning class, it might be 95% input and 5% output. Because beginners don't know any language. They haven't acquired enough language to produce anything. As you start moving up to intermediate and advanced, you're going to have more and more output. You're going to allow students students are going to be able to say a lot more things and produce a lot more language. Is there exact percentage? No. However, generally speaking, most teachers push too much output too early. They think that students can do more than they can. You need to adjust your expectations downward. You need to think about your students as not being able to produce very much. And then if they're able to produce more than you think, great. But if you try to push it too high, you're going to increase their output filter, their input filter, their anxiety, and so forth. Question 19. How do we recognize what our students' interests are, and how do we motivate them to join the class? First thing, you got to know your students. So you got to talk to them before class, during class, after class. The more you know your students, the more you'll know whether what they know, what they're interested in. Number 2, ask them. Give them a survey in Farsi, hand it out. Here are things that we could talk about. Which of these things are you interested in? Survey them. Number 3, experiment. As I said before, try it. See if it works. If it works, great. If not, move on to something else. Question number 20. Stories are very effective. I kind of answered this question before about teaching grammar in stories. You should let the story be the driver. Okay, the story is, we'd say, is in the driver's seat. Okay, that's the one who's controlling things. The grammar is in the back seat. Okay, so whoever's, whatever car it is that you get in, if you want to focus on grammar, use what's in the story, but don't pick the story in order to teach a grammar point. Question number 21. What should I teach in terms of content? I think I've talked about this already. Teach something that your students are interested in, more importantly, that you're interested in, and you can communicate that interest to students. Teach things that students may have already studied in their regular class. You could teach the geography of Iran or the Middle East, or the history of Iran or the Middle East or Europe or any other topic. You could teach science and math, okay? Any topic that a student has already studied, they'll have lots of background information. And if they have background information, they'll be able to understand it. You can understand things more about a topic that you know something about than a topic that you don't know anything about. So I read the newspaper every day in English. I read 2 newspapers every day in English. When I look at a story on a French news website about an American topic, I can understand a lot more than if it's an article about French politics, because I don't know anything about French politics. So background knowledge is important. Don't be afraid to pick a topic. Even if students have already studied it, they'll actually enjoy it because they'll be able to understand more and they'll be able to acquire more English. What's the best source for improving, question number 22, what's the best source for improving ourselves in break times when we are surfing the internet to have something fun and enjoyable to learn? Well, reading is always the most efficient way. What you read depends on what you're interested in. The internet is full of information, full of books, free books that you can get. You just have to find what you're interested in. Whatever you do, however, make sure that you're developing your English every day, because the more that you understand what it's like not to understand, the more that you'll be able to help your students understand. Okay. Question number 23, in the lessons introduction, oh, I think I talked about this one. What do you teach students in terms of the introduction? I think we've talked about that already. Question number 24, and it's the last question. Pretty good timing, huh? How can we improve our presentation, and can we include other students in our presentation? Well, teaching is like anything else. You have to practice it. So if you're talking about improving your own presentation of information, you should practice it before class at home. After you write your lesson plan, you should go through your mind and pretend like you're teaching that lesson. First of all, it'll give you confidence when you come into the classroom because you've already practiced it. And second of all, it'll give you kind of an idea about how much you can talk about that day. Okay. Now, once you become an experienced teacher, I've been teaching for 35 years, you know how much time it's going to take. I have 1 minute left and I'm on my last question. Pretty good, huh? I didn't have to practice it because I know how long it's going to take me to talk about topics. But you as a beginning teacher, you don't know that. So you need to practice before your class, every class. Never walk into your class saying, oh, well, what am I going to do today? That's a terrible, terrible thing. When you're old like Amir and me, yeah, you can do that, okay? But not now, not at the beginning. In terms of students making presentations, student presentations should only be done at an advanced level or at a high intermediate level when students have enough English that they can actually produce things. There's no use having students write something down and then look at their paper like this. Today I am going to talk about. No, that's just reading out loud, okay? To give a good presentation, students have to be able to speak somewhat fluently, and that means you probably don't want to do a lot of that until you start getting students at a higher level. Okay, and with that, 1 hour. How's that, Amir?
Perfect, Jeff. That was great. The timing was fantastic, Jeff. Awesome, awesome. And usually at the end of webinars, people say now we're open to questions, but actually that's what you were doing in the last 1 hour. So this is beautiful, beautiful problem-based actually webinar, which was really amazing, Jeff. Actually, after attending almost probably 10 webinars of yours, and after teaching like for about 23-4 years, every second of your lessons were making a lot of sense to me, Jeff. It was really absolutely great. And we have actually put a lot of your lessons into practice in Iranzamin language school in Iran. And we are hearing a lot of positive feedback from people about this actually comprehensible input actually technique or approach. Yeah. And in terms of returning your favor, Jeff, I was thinking, if people you have taught, Iranian people, return your favor by teaching you 1 hour of Farsi, I think that's a fair game, isn't it?
That's a very good deal. Yeah, in fact, my neighbors who live next to me are originally from Iran. They're Farsi speakers, so I could learn a few things, and then I could walk over to my neighbor and go, hey, blah, 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 and they'll go. We'll work on that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I know it's a weekday for you. You have a day ahead of you. It's night for us.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Actually, I don't have enough. Thank you. Pooja, do you have anything to say before Jeff? We just close the meeting.
It was a rich one. It was a rich session, as always, of course, Professor. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Puri. Thank you, Amir. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.